morning, everyone. Thanks for being here again today. It's also known as Mesa, so it's great to have you for the second day. My name is Leah, Kenney, and I'll be presenting on the conservation elements, the aquatic, coarse, and fine filters. And yesterday I kind of gave summary and take-home messages for the coarse filters and the fine filters. So today I'm just going to recap the data gaps for the coarse filters and then provide some new results for our fine filters or our fish species. And just as a refresher recap, those are our three conservation coarse filter elements, the habitats. We have connected lakes, disconnected lakes, and streams. And all of these, these three habitats were selected based on consultation with BLM biologists, and all three habitat types have important ecological or social importance to the study area. So, as we said yesterday, the coarse filters were identified as a data gap up front, and the main reason for that was this lack of an aquatic habitat classification map. So we were really limited in what we could do with our spatial analyses for some of the change agent, climate development intersections with CE. Additionally, we have an outdated NHD for the study area and for Alaska-wide for the most part. We did use the NHD to develop our distribution maps for the coarse filters, but those maps are that the NHD is based on are about 50 to 60 years old. So updating the NHD within the YKL study area would be a huge benefit to further management of these aquatic coarse filters. And then the third data gap was our lack of climate change predictions, particularly water temperature. So as Nancy went into yesterday with the climate presentation, we lacked water temperature data, so air temperature was used as a proxy for all of our aquatic coarse filter and fine filter analyses. So with that, I'm going to go right into the fine filters unless there's any questions about
NHD, something hydrologic?
Yeah, sorry, that's National Hydrography Data Set. Yeah. Okay, so our fine filter, our fish species are these five that were selected for the YKL: Chinook salmon, chum salmon, northern pike, Dolly Varden, and sheefish. Yesterday I presented an example of the CA climate intersection with salmon, so how temperature increases might impact salmon populations and habitat. Today I'm going to present a result for permafrost thaw and Dolly Varden, and then also present our second management question, which has to deal with mineral resource development and fishery habitat. So this figure on the right is of predicted model distribution for Dolly Varden. So everything in blue is model Dolly Varden distribution. And then overlaid on top of that in yellow is Nancy, if you're on the phone, yeah, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the change in continuous permafrost, discontinuous permafrost from 2010 to 2060. So it's a long term that we're looking at, permafrost thaw or retreat. And you can see from that map that that biggest change is anticipated for the northern part of the study area and then a little part of the eastern part of the study area there. And permafrost thaw is projected to have both positive and negative potential impacts on Dolly Varden habitat. Some of the potential positive impacts are increased nutrient input, and this isn't just specifically to Dolly Varden, but to freshwater ecosystems in general. And with an increased nutrient input, we anticipate an increase in primary productivity, which could, in the short term at least, improve the quality of feeding habitat for Dolly Varden and other fish species. Another potential positive impact is the increase in groundwater flows, which is anticipated with permafrost thaw. And this is important for Dolly Varden because we have both resident year-round populations in the study area and then anadromous populations too that use overwintering habitat. And the overwintering habitat is somewhat limited. So improving the overwintering habitat with either creating new habitat or improving what's already there is anticipated for the short term. and then some of the negative impacts that are anticipated include lake drainage or loss of habitat. And I talked a little bit about this yesterday with the loss of habitat, lake habitat for disconnected and connected lakes with permafrost thaw. And then also erosion or increased sedimentation and turbidity.
Before you leave this slide,
Yeah.
So this study area, in particular, the lower, say, third of this area is pretty much free of permafrost, and the whole middle section is pretty discontinuous, and the north
Yeah.
is pretty continuous. So in terms of like these positive impacts, have there actually been any studies in this area or anywhere in Alaska that say that this actually, these positive impacts actually happen, or is
Yeah.
this, there have been?
There have been up north more so for the nutrient increase of nitrogen and phosphorus. They found that in the short term that there's a release or flush of those nutrients to freshwater systems. I think it's been inferred that would benefit the aquatic organisms. And then groundwater flow, I don't think there are any studies actually that have looked at how that's actually impacted habitat, but the assumption is with increased groundwater flow, there'll be more habitat, so. Okay,
This is Karen and Galena. I have a quick question about that lake drainage. Most of those, at least in our area, it's the disconnected lakes with the predominance of permafrost that are really more dynamic, and those aren't going to have things like Dolly Varden. Did you take that into consideration at all?
Yeah, actually some, I can't speak specifically to the YKL, but I do know that in other parts of Alaska there are populations of Dolly Varden that do reside in disconnected lakes, landlocked lakes. But
Okay.
yeah, so I don't know specifically, we just don't have the data for that, for the YKL, whether or not they exist in the disconnected lakes. But there is projected to be some drainage and decline in lake area for connected lakes as well with permafrost thaw, but just not as significant or not as much as what's projected for the disconnected lakes. Okay, so we had two management questions for that were relevant to the fish species. I presented the climate management question yesterday that related to how climate change might impact fish habitat. Our second management question related to how and where mineral resource development might affect fishery habitat. So we first conducted a literature review to examine the potential impacts that both subsistence and commercial harvest may have on fishery habitat. But we don't have any Dolly Varden subsistence data for the study area, so we weren't able to look at Dolly Varden data spatially. They weren't included in the spatial analysis. And then to look at where on the landscape or where in the study area mineral resource development might affect fishery habitat, we took the distribution maps and the landscape condition model together, which I'll talk about in this next slide. And then the four fish species minus Dolly Varden, and then overlaid on top of that the harvest data and mineral resource development data for the study area. And for the mineral resource development data, we used placer and hard rock mining data that Walker talked about yesterday. So I just wanted to show this slide. Again, I presented it briefly yesterday, but it provides context for the maps that we developed to answer the management questions. We used the landscape condition as a base layer for maps for the management question. And really the take-home message here is that this is an example of Chinook landscape condition, but all the fish species look very similar. And you can see from the histogram there that anything in blue or green is considered high landscape condition or good landscape condition. So currently and into the long term, we anticipate that the landscape condition will remain good, and we wanted to use that landscape condition as a base layer so we could look at how that related to where the mineral resource development was projected to take place. So this is a figure representing our answer to the management question, and this is an example again of Chinook, but we did this for all species except for Dolly Varden, and you can find all those maps in the final memo. So at the base layer, we had that landscape condition, and then on top of that, we overlaid subsistence data. And that's in this bottom legend here. Anything in green represents low subsistence harvest use. Anything yellow is medium subsistence use, and that pinkish color is high. And then on top of that, we overlaid the placer mining data, so that's that orange polygon. And then for the near term, we have Donlin, the hard rock mining project. Up in the corner, it's a little orange diamond, and then in the long term, we have Pebble and Donlin. So what you can see from this is that within the placer mining region, there's not a lot of subsistence use areas identified, and the landscape condition within those areas also look relatively good or intact.
Was there any consideration in this of what areas are open or closed to mining and what areas are mineralized? I know there's a lot of data out there that the state DGGS has done on where there's mineral potential, and some areas are closed to mining, so it seems that this is pretty generic.
Yeah, Walker, I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit more. Walker presented most of the development mining data yesterday, and there are a lot of limitations for what we could confidently appoint a mining site, active or non-active.
Yeah, but at no point did he present this yellow blob as you have it on this map.
Yeah, we chose. He did present the discrete points, and we chose to use this broader area. So this is polygon that was drawn around all of those placer mining points to just create more of a buffer, because any impact from mining won't just affect the stream at one point in time, it will affect it downstream as well, potentially. But we don't have a lot of the detailed information about whether or not the mine is currently active, if there's cleanup activities, a lot of the information that would be necessary to really assess what impact the mining would have on these stream habitats.
The polygon corresponds really well with our locatable mineral potential report for the Bering Sea Western Interior RMP. That is the mineral belt that has the most medium and high potential for mining.
Yeah.
So
Right. The blob is around the area that we talked about yesterday, from southwest point, from Galena down to McGrath. That whole corridor has a lot of mineral potential and existing and past place of gold mining. So this yellow blob corresponds to that belt. And as far as blob, is that right?
Very typical.
I just went with the word that somebody else used. I'll check into the state DGGS, but I don't believe we had access to that data set. The best data set we could find was USGS ARDF file.
Yeah, I guess that's a real concern, because I know we manage mines that are not in the ARDF data set, and we've seen lots and lots of mineralization data that is available out there that just doesn't seem to be reflected here. It makes sense that the active mines historically in the ARDF data set are going to capture the mineralized areas that miners know about, but I'm not sure that's an accurate reflection of anything more than the past. So that's just a concern I have about this, particularly in the northern part of this area.
So that you guys, Walker, you talked with our mining compliance people in the Anchorage field office with Joe and James to ask them for data, but I'm not sure if you...
We've got mineral potential study done by BLM for the southern part of this area, and the mineral potential represented in that file, it covers about 50% of this area, and that corresponds very well with what ARDF gave us. Since it only covers 50% of the area, we didn't explicitly use that information from the file that we got from BLM, because it is being covered by ARDF. Whatever we got from both these correspond very well with each other, so we didn't go with it. And mineral potential has inherent problems in talking about potential, because what might be considered potential might not actually be mined in future. It's very hard to tell what's going to be mined. It depends a lot on market factors, and all that depends on availability, accessibility, and several other things come into play.
Yeah, and in the final memo, we did try to qualify the impacts in an extensive literature review, which we provide for each species what potential impacts may be. So there is a nice literature review that corresponds with this management question.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
Where's the high salmon areas? I
It's
just can't
not-
see any of the.
yeah.
Okay, maybe it's.
Not a whole lot identified there, and yeah,
There's some areas with more Manzanita and there's portions, reaches, that are in that McGrath, within the placer mining polygon, but.
Well, one thing I thought I heard Tim say was, what's open to mining, and this might be mineral potential, but, isn't, BLM lands withdrawn that are open to mining, wouldn't that play an issue here?
Currently, and that might be pertinent for the current and maybe even the near term, but I think for the long term, we'd want to look at the full suite of potential, because those withdrawals are temporary. They're only intended for the purpose of completing the state selection process. So I think for long term, for sure, we would want to assume that those areas are open. I think that one of the issues that Tim raises about the difference between potential and historic mining is actually an issue in the way we did our locatable analysis, because the historic mining weighted heavily in that locatable report, and I'm not totally sure I agree with the way that approach, but that's kind of BLM Alaska approach to locatable reporting. You know, that's kind of how we did that. Those were the assumptions that BLM made. I'm not sure they're valid, but it's kind of what we did. So, and maybe, Tim, you guys are going to do something different for Central Yukon, but, you know, that was kind of the approach that Rob and Joe took for the locatable report for
John
Bisbee. And Joe and Rob Brumbaugh, I think the three of those guys, right, worked on that? Anyway,
Okay.
sorry.
That's okay. Okay, so, data gaps for the fine filter fish species, I touched on some of these yesterday, and I didn't present in detail the distribution maps that we developed, for the fine filter fish species, but we were, only able to produce 2 predictive model distributions for northern pike and dolly, because we actually did have presence-absence data. The other 3 species, Chinook, chum, and sheepfish, were all, developed based on data from the Anadromous Waters Catalog and other presence data. So, absence data for those freshwater species, especially the salmon, would be great for future modeling. And then, like I said, an updated NHD, the National Hydrography Data Set, and also the better quality DEM for identifying better habitat predictors. And then our climate-linked models, again, water temperature, we're only able to use air temperature as a proxy for water temperature. And then long-term trends in temporal changes in fish populations is another fairly big data gap for this area. We lack data on just detailed movement and migration patterns and habits, and also overwintering habitat use, so identifying where these fish populations overwinter would be very beneficial. And then in particular, sheepfish, we had very few data that identified spawning habitat, so we identified that as a pretty big data gap as well. And I think that's it for me, so have any more questions? Okay.
I'll say one of the nice things, or one of the things we can look forward to with these data gaps is that a lot of, well, at least the NHD and the DEM are both being actively pursued by the state, and could really use some additional support from agencies, and so that's why we specifically highlighted them here, because NHD is going to be updated, but through a massive multi-agency kind of agreement, and the updated digital elevation models are coming via the state, and so continued support for that kind of stuff. These are direct